There's a moment a lot of people have experienced. Just a normal evening, you happen to read an article about retirement savings, or you hear someone say something like, "At this age, you're supposed to have about this much saved," and almost instantly, a familiar thought shows up in your head. Maybe, "I'm already too late." I've spent years observing how people think about money, and there's something interesting I've noticed. A lot of people don't struggle financially because they don't earn enough. They struggle because of a much simpler belief. They believe they started too late, and when someone believes they're late, they usually do one of two things. Either they give up before they even begin, or they try to make money very quickly through things they don't fully understand. What's interesting is that both reactions usually lead to the same outcome. Nothing really changes. But after looking at many different financial stories over the years, I realized something most people overlook. Starting late isn't the biggest problem. The real issue is how you react to starting late. And once you understand that, you begin to see something surprising. In personal finance, people who start late but think clearly about money often go much further than people who started early but never built discipline. Today, I want to share a perspective that very few people explain clearly, not to make you feel better, but to help you see things more accurately. Because when you see the problem clearly, the decisions you make afterwards start to change. Main point 1. The moment you realize you're behind can actually be a psychological advantage. I've noticed something that feels a little paradoxical. People who begin taking money seriously in their mid-30s, 40s, or even mid-40s often have something younger people don't: urgency. When someone is very young, money often feels abstract. They know saving is good. They know investing matters. But all of that still feels far away. Life ahead of them seems long. And when the brain believes time is unlimited, discipline tends to weaken. But when someone starts to feel like they may be behind schedule, their perspective on money changes completely. I've seen this happen many times. Someone who used to barely think about spending suddenly starts asking questions about small decisions. Do I really need to upgrade my phone this year? Do I need to replace my car right now? Do I need to keep all these small monthly subscriptions? What's interesting is that this shift usually doesn't come from forced discipline. It comes from awareness. Once you understand that today's financial decisions actually shape your future, you naturally begin behaving differently. I often tell people this: the feeling that I should probably do something about this now is one of the most powerful assets in a financial journey, because a lot of people never feel that urgency. They delay things. They think next year will be fine, and suddenly 5 years go by. What's interesting is that late starters often don't have that luxury of delay. They're forced to think more clearly. They're forced to act sooner, and sometimes that clarity becomes an advantage. But right after this stage, a very common psychological mistake tends to appear, a mistake that quietly ruins a lot of financial plans. Main point 2. The most common mistake people make when they believe they started too late. After observing many financial journeys, I started noticing a reaction that shows up again and again. When someone believes they're behind, their first instinct is to try to catch up as fast as possible. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, but that mindset often leads to some very dangerous decisions. I've seen situations like this many times. Someone who barely invested before suddenly decides it's time to completely change their financial life. They start reading everything they can. They watch videos about investments that can grow very quickly. They hear stories about people building wealth in just a few years. And before long, they begin to believe the only way to catch up is to find some kind of big opportunity. What's interesting is that in finance, when someone starts chasing big opportunities too quickly, they often ignore the most basic principles. They skip building consistent saving habits. They stop paying attention to where their money actually goes. They ignore steady investing. Instead, they place all their hope in one single decision, one investment, one opportunity, one move that they believe will change everything. I've realized this is one of the biggest psychological traps when it comes to money. When we feel behind, the brain naturally searches for the fastest path forward. But in finance, the fastest path is rarely the safest one. What's interesting is that people who actually improve their financial lives rarely do anything dramatic. They don't try to recover lost time through one big decision. Instead, they change something much simpler. They change the rhythm of their cash flow. I've noticed that when someone begins redirecting part of their income into investments consistently every month, something very quiet begins to happen. Money starts accumulating slowly, not loudly, not dramatically, but over time it becomes a powerful force. Most people don't realize that the biggest difference between people who build wealth and people who don't usually isn't a single big decision. It's a small habit repeated over many years. But there's another factor that's even more important, and very few people talk about it clearly, a factor that can completely change the speed at which someone builds wealth. Main point 3. The speed of building wealth depends heavily on cash flow, not just time. After years of observing how people build their finances, I noticed a very common misunderstanding. Most people believe the most important factor in investing is starting early. And yes, that matters, but it's not the entire story. What's interesting is that many people who start early contribute very little. Meanwhile, some people who start later invest significantly larger amounts every month. And over time, the outcome can look very different. I've seen situations like this quite often. Someone starts investing at a young age, but every month they only set aside a small amount, not because they couldn't save more, but because most of their income gradually gets absorbed by lifestyle, a nicer home, a better car, more services, more convenience spending. Investing always comes last. And by the time they reach the end of the month, there usually isn't much left. On the other hand, I've also met people who begin thinking seriously about money around their late 30s or early 40s. And interestingly, they often have an advantage younger people don't. Their income is usually higher, their careers are more stable, they have more experience. So when they decide to direct a meaningful portion of their income toward investing, the flow of money into investments begins growing much faster. Most people don't realize that in personal finance, there are two powerful forces. One is time. The other is the amount of money entering the system. If someone doesn't have a big advantage in time, they can still adjust the other force, cash flow. I've noticed that when someone raises their savings rate to a meaningful level, their wealth trajectory begins to change, not in a few months, but over several years. What's interesting is that this shift rarely comes from cutting every expense. It usually comes from something else, increasing income. Because there's something many people overlook. The ability to cut expenses always has limits, but the ability to increase income is often much wider. And when income grows but lifestyle doesn't immediately grow with it, something powerful starts to appear, financial breathing room. And when that extra margin is redirected straight into investing, it can change the entire trajectory of someone's financial life. But at this stage, there's another psychological trap that many people fall into, a trap that slows down wealth building without them even realizing it. Main point 4. When income rises, lifestyle often rises faster than wealth. After years of observing people's financial behavior, I noticed something interesting. Most people who feel like they can't seem to build savings aren't struggling because they don't earn enough. It's because their money disappears almost as soon as it arrives. And this happens very naturally. When income goes up a little, life also starts changing a little. At first, the changes are small. A slightly nicer apartment, a better car, a more comfortable vacation, a few services that make life easier. Each individual change seems perfectly reasonable. And because of that, very few people feel like they're overspending. But when you look back a few years later, something interesting appears. Their income has increased quite a bit, but their savings have barely moved. I realized this is one of the most powerful psychological patterns related to money. Our brains adapt to a new standard of living very quickly. Something that once felt like a luxury can quietly become normal within a few years. And once something feels normal, going back to a lower level becomes very difficult. That's why many people say things like, "I make way more money than I used to, but somehow I still don't have much left." Most people don't realize that the period right after income increases is the most important moment. That's when you decide where the new money will go. The familiar path is to let lifestyle absorb all of it. But there's another path that fewer people choose, keeping your lifestyle roughly the same for a while, and redirecting the extra income into investments. What's interesting is that doing this for just a few years can dramatically change someone's financial trajectory, because wealth rarely grows from occasional big decisions. It grows from cash flow being redirected consistently over time. But even when someone does all of this correctly, there's still one very important factor many people overlook. A factor that doesn't directly make you richer, but without it, an entire financial plan can fall apart from a single unexpected event. Main point 5. Without financial protection, every investment plan is fragile. I've noticed something interesting when looking at how people build financial plans. Most people get excited about the growth part, where to invest, how much return they might get, what their portfolio should look like. Those topics attract a lot of attention. But another part of the financial system often gets overlooked: the ability to withstand unexpected events. Most people don't realize that life rarely unfolds exactly according to plan. A car can break down when you least expect it. A medical bill can show up at the worst possible time. A gap between jobs can happen even when everything previously seemed stable. These events are not always huge, but they share one thing in common: they arrive when you're not prepared. I've seen many people build solid investment plans. They start saving consistently. They begin investing for the long term. Everything appears to be moving in the right direction. Then an unexpected financial shock happens. And because they don't have a financial cushion, they're forced to do something they never intended. They pull money out of their investments. What's interesting is that when this happens, the damage is usually larger than the amount withdrawn, not only because of taxes or penalties, but because the accumulation process gets interrupted. A financial system is a lot like a flywheel. Once it starts spinning, it gains more and more momentum. But if you constantly have to stop it to deal with short-term problems, that flywheel never builds real speed. That's why I always say an emergency fund isn't the boring part of a financial plan. It's the layer that protects the entire system from collapsing. Just having a few months of living expenses set aside makes many financial decisions calmer and clearer. You don't have to sell assets at the worst possible moment. You don't have to break long-term plans just because of a short-term problem. But even when someone saves consistently, invests regularly, and maintains an emergency fund, there's still a very subtle psychological factor, one that quietly slows down many people's financial progress without them realizing it. Main point 6. The story you tell yourself about money can shape your financial future. After years of observing financial behavior, I noticed a very subtle but incredibly powerful factor. It's the way people think about themselves when it comes to money. There's a kind of internal story many people repeat in their minds. I'm just not good with money. I'm always starting late. I'm not the kind of person who invests. These thoughts are rarely spoken out loud, but they quietly live inside someone's mind. And what's interesting is that when someone believes that story long enough, their behavior starts aligning with it. They delay opening investment accounts. They don't negotiate salary because they assume they don't have many options. They sell assets when markets drop because they feel they don't understand enough to stay invested. I've noticed that people who truly change their financial situation usually begin with a very small shift. They don't wait until they understand everything perfectly. They start first. Maybe it's just a small amount of money. Maybe it's simply opening their first investment account. Maybe it's finally tracking their cash flow seriously for the first time. What's interesting is that once someone starts taking action, the way they see themselves begins to change. They're no longer someone who is thinking about investing. They become someone who invests. That shift sounds small, but in behavioral psychology, it's extremely powerful because when your identity changes, your decisions begin to change with it. I've seen many people start very late, yet within just a few years, they built financial foundations they once believed were impossible, not because they found a magical investment, but because they began behaving differently with money. They saved before they spent. They invested before upgrading their lifestyle. They became more patient with short-term market swings. They started viewing money as a system to build, not a series of disconnected decisions. And once that happens, time begins working in their favor. If you feel like you started late, there's one simple thing I want you to remember. In personal finance, most people don't fail because they started late. They fail because they never truly begin. I've realized that the simple act of taking money seriously already puts someone in a very different position from most people. When you understand how money actually works, when you redirect your cash flow, when you stay disciplined for a few consistent years, your financial trajectory can change far more than you expect. You don't need dramatic decisions. You don't need rare opportunities. Just small actions repeated long enough. And sometimes the most important thing isn't the age you start. It's that you begin thinking differently starting today. If you found these perspectives helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos about money psychology and financial behavior. Because sometimes understanding how people think about money is just as important as understanding how money itself works.